On today's podcast, we sit down with Africori Director of Operations, Adam Tiran. Adam has been a driving force behind the global rise of African music, from catapulting local genres like Amapiano and Afro House into world stages, to guiding chart-topping artists through the maze of international success. We dive into the seismic shifts transforming Africa's music industry, the cultural impact of cross-border collaborations, and how Africori balances independent roots with major label firepower. Plus, Adam reveals what African artists are teaching the world, not just musically, but philosophically. If you're ready to understand the future of the global music market, you can't afford to miss this conversation. Insiders, are you ready?
Welcome to MUBUTV's Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Ritch Eric and Eric Knight. Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we're thrilled to welcome Adam Tiran, Director of Operations at Africori, one of the leading voices shaping the future of African music on the world stage. Adam gives us an inside look at the explosive global rise of genres like Afrobeats and Amapiano, how African artists are breaking down genre barriers, and the pivotal role that digital platforms and strategic partnerships play in taking local sounds global. We dive deep into how Africori operates with the spirit of a label while maintaining the agility of a distributor, the impact of landmark songs and events like the IMS Showcase, and what it really means for African creators to take their culture to the world. Adam even shares his personal story, key influences, and why the African music label is evolving into something so much greater. If you've ever wondered how genres evolve, what goes on behind the scenes of major global hits, or how emerging markets are redefining the modern music business, you don't want to miss this conversation. Stay tuned, Insiders. You're not going to want to miss this. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hey Insiders, ready to crush it in the music world? Whether you're an artist, band, or future music biz pro, MUBUTV's personalized coaching is your secret weapon.
We'll work with you side by side, sharpening your songs, building your brand story, locking in your ideal audience, and powering up your social media game.
Starting fresh or ready for the next level, we cover everything. Live shows, marketing hacks, branding, all tailored just for you.
Flexible coaching packages let you decide what fits your time and budget. Single sessions or discounted bundles that make investing easy.
Imagine the boost after just one session. Clearer goals, smarter strategies, and unstoppable confidence. Get started with a free 15-minute discovery call at book.mubutv.com. That's book.mubutv.com. Let's make your music career unstoppable. Hey Insiders, are you ready to take serious control of your music career? Whether you're dreaming of getting signed, finding the perfect artist manager, or landing your music in movies and TV shows, MUBUTV has you covered with 3 essential free guides.
First, learn how to contact A&R the right way. The insider secrets to approaching executives without burning bridges and with confidence.
Next, discover how to attract the right artist manager, when to start looking, what to expect, and how to find someone who truly believes in your vision.
And finally, unlock the world of sync licensing with how to pitch to music supervisors the right way. Get your music placed in film and TV, reach new audiences, and open up exciting revenue streams.
These guides are packed with real-world advice, practical steps, and the do's and don'ts every artist needs.
If you're listening on this podcast or watching on YouTube, just check the description below to download your free copies now. This is your blueprint for turning dreams into reality. Don't miss out.
Hi, this is Mark Caruso, CEO at Angry Mob Music, and you're listening to the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast.
Welcome back, Insiders. Today's featured guest is Adam Tiran, Director of Operations at Africori, one of the leading voices shaping the future of African music on the world stage. As you know, Eric, we have been wanting to have this conversation for a very long time. I remember when we first spoke to Adam, and it was, several months ago, and we were able to book this. We've spoken before, and I speak about it all the time in my classes, how Africa is really emerging on the world stage.
Absolutely.
I mean, you have the giant artists like, Burna Boy and Gunna and
right.
Tyla, which are emerging out across the world as huge superstars.
Right.
And, one of the things that I think is so important and was so interesting in our conversation was how Adam really it helped me really understand the role of distribution in emerging markets. That is what I think has put, companies like Africori and African music on the global stage. And it will continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Distributors, I think, like Africori, they play a key role in artist development and in the international strategy. And long before, even their association with Warner's, which they have now, they sealed that up, finalized that in February of this year, before that even took place. And I think the point that is so interesting to me is that this is what I think is going to be a blueprint for so many other territories of the world, around the world, that were not ever considered musical hubs in the past, are now going to be.
I couldn't agree more, Rich. One of the other areas that I loved about this conversation was about artist development beyond distribution, and how Adam shares how Africori acts more like a community center, offering hands-on support far beyond simple music delivery. And this is, again, getting back to that hands-on thing about artist development and really trying to nurture these artists and get them to the next level, especially in emerging markets such as Africa.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're seeing that everywhere. We've seen that with some of our other guests. I remember the conversation that we had with Ed Poston, where he talked about Symphonics' worldwide view. As you spoke about that just now, it reminded me that, they're building their A&R staffs all around the world.
Right.
That it's not just the 4 or 5 big territories like it had been for 40, 50 years in the past. Now we're starting to see many, 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 many more, as you just articulated, come on board. And that's a very, very healthy thing for music.
And with that, insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured conversation with Adam Tiran.
Adam, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us. Adam, the African music industry has rapidly evolved in recent years, with a very strong surge in global interest. From your vantage point as Director of Operations of Africori, what are the key changes you've observed in the way African artists engage with international markets, and how does Africori's role position it as a driving force in this shift?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, I think we have to probably start going back maybe 10, 15 years to say the journey that African music as a whole has been on, at least in a contemporary sense. And most of that is kind of in relation to Afrobeats, of course, which is like the dominant, genre to have kind of had some global interest. So the way that genre was born was, of course, largely from a place of West African rhythms all coming together, very much like inspired by local sounds, local hip hop, Fuji, Juju, all sorts of that. And then quite a lot of inspiration and influence from, Western sounds, R&B at the time, house even in some places. And I think we're going from a place of there wasn't very much knowledge or access or real care or consideration for contemporary African music, at least when I sort of began with Africori, which is going back maybe 12 years. And around that time is when Afrobeats was just starting to pick up. And I think it's safe to say that there has been a seismic shift since then. Of course, it's been a long and slow one, but there's been a few key moments that have really expanded the sound globally. I think in terms of how we're approaching the rest of the world and how African artists are approaching the rest of the world, it's very much now at a place where things are considered to be global from the very first moment. So back in the day, if you had a song that was #1 in Nigeria or #1 in South Africa, you wouldn't necessarily have been thinking about the international markets. It would have been an absolute rarity, perhaps more in the world music or kind of jazz space where that would have been happening. But it did start to begin. And I think so much of that we have to put down to social media, to the prevalence of TikTok and Instagram and, the power within the phones. And once those sorts of, cultural trends and dance trends and sonic trends started to cross over. And we're talking maybe in just the last 5 years or so now, 5-10 years. Then, of course, now the importance of those markets starts to become much more kind of apparent. So I think there's been a lot of learning along the way. I think there's been a lot of having to carve out a path and blaze a trail, as it were. Of course, stepping into international waters is never an easy thing. It can be a tricky space to navigate, especially if it's, you know, kind of for artists who may not have traveled themselves, you know. So that's where we start to come in, I suppose. And in more recent years, especially labels like Africori, distros like Africori, we hold hands, I suppose, and we try to help these artists sort of step into international spaces, whether it's knowing which promoters to deal with, whether it's, you know, identifying the right media to work with in the US, or if it's, you know, understanding which events to do. You know, we have some of that kind of international nuance just by the nature of some of the people within the team. And it's always been a mission for us to, first of all, establish African music continentally and locally. And, you know, when we started Africori, it was really a point of there wasn't a digital local industry to speak of, as it were. You know, we were in a place where it's quite difficult to even entice artists to have a digital distribution deal at that point. It was not really well known about, you know, the technology and the internet access were not super prevalent. And so that was where we began, you know, just to give you a kind of like side A and side B of it all, like that's the kind of benchmark. So things have obviously, you know, catapulted into where we are today, which is you can't release a song anymore without thinking about international. You know, I think if you're not doing that, you're missing a trick. So whether it's remixes now, like we see an Ira Star, for instance, working with Latin artists, and, you know, Nasty C from South Africa working with Japanese rappers and whatever it is. And at least in an instance that we worked on, we had a major record a couple of years ago called Shwalabam, last year even, which was a major Amapiano record from South Africa, Pretoria-based producers and vocalists, and became a huge sensation. And that just blew up overnight, you know, largely through TikTok, largely through dance challenges. And essentially what happened was there became the need for us to kind of broaden the net into the rest of Africa. Amapiano at that point was starting to pick up attraction all over the rest of the continent, but it started climbing the charts in Nigeria, for instance. And it eventually ended up being number one in Nigeria, the first South African song without a Nigerian feature to ever be, you know, number one. And we knew at that point, I mean, obviously we saw it coming, but we knew at that point this was something different. And we needed to tap into the West African market in order to sort of like step into the international waters, the UK. And that's when we kind of ended up getting Burna Boy on the remix, and fast forward 6 months later, taking the Shwalabam artists to London for Burna's show and performing the song there in front of 70,000 people. And it's one example of something that we worked on recently, because this is now happening very, very often. And it's a deluge of information for artists to try and, you know, compact and learn and take on, especially when many of the artists we work with in South Africa are kind of like overnight stars. And so they're picking up the industry from one day to the next. So yeah, I mean, it's absolutely a part of every strategy that we have from day one now. And that's a great thing. We're in a good place.
Adam, it's really great having you on the show. You know, I wanted to ask you, you've said that Africori operates with the spirit of a record label. How does this hybrid identity shape your artist relationships and long-term development strategy compared to traditional distribution models?
Sure thing. Well, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that it's a common trend in the emerging markets that the distributors are often the ones who were there earlier, you know, than the majors. And then sometimes in some cases, independent labels as well. And so you end up taking on a role of community center or network to many, many different artists. And, if you worth your salt, hopefully you will do a great job of it and, sort of change some lives, and then word of mouth travels. And that's kind of what happened with us. So we are primarily a distributor, that is kind of our main bread and butter. But I think what I mean by that phrase is that the artist development element of what we're trying to do, and kind of what I was speaking about before internationally and whatnot, and being very involved in the creative with the artists and being extremely collaborative. Never, of course, like any obligation about, well, you must do this because we're your label. We're definitely different in that respect, but we try to be as hands-on as possible because we have experienced that is the way to get the best results. It doesn't work with everybody, like people work with us in all sorts of different capacities. If they think they've got their stuff together, they're all good. They can just give us the music and we'll distribute. But our preferred way of working is, certainly to be heavily involved and to try and take it as far as possible.
Yeah. Adam, I want to shift to another element that you talked about, which I thought was very interesting in light of what you've been speaking about just now. You mentioned a shift from categorizing African music strictly as African to recognizing it, I guess, what you'd call within the global genres like pop or R&B. And I've got a two-part question for you on this. Number one, what needs to happen, I guess, culturally and structurally for these classifications to truly dissolve in industry practice? And two, will this reclassification impact its cultural identity in your mind?
I mean, it's a great question. I mean, I know exactly what you're speaking of, and it's completely two-pronged in that there is no desire of us or anyone on the continent to erase any of the kind of local nuance of all of the myriad sounds and genres and, like specificities of what comes out of the continent. And yet, of course, we're in a world where it's a very polarized world that we live in at the moment. I feel like we have two sects of society. We have this kind of hyper-localized space within the music industry, especially in emerging markets, like local music dominates the charts and people are very obsessed and consumed with that. And then we have this sort of like desire of the world and politics and the news and especially the labels' desire and even distribution networks to globalize everything, right? So we're kind of trying to find a bridge between those two ways of thinking. We're living in a world where Donald Trump, mentioned about Lesotho, that nobody has ever heard of that country. I don't know if you guys heard that quote a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago. But, that's the kind of level of, at least in certain spaces, ignorance that we are still having to deal with on a kind of, global level. So I think what we have to do is try to translate the local nuance into these international, perhaps Western categories, right? But we have many, many distinct genres. And of course, like locally, we understand a lot of that and we delve deeper and we know the difference between, let's say, Afrobeats and Amapiano and Afro House and Kwaito and all that sort of thing. So in order to your question, I think that it is a good thing once we have now got to a place, now that we have got to a place of African music not only being defined as African music, because I think it is very much in the same vein as the world music category. It's kind of just like stick it in this pigeonhole and everything else just goes in there. It's quite like otherly. And we'd certainly have kind of always fought against that. African music itself is obviously different to world music, and there's been quite a lot of change. It can be things like the DSPs, integrating new genres in their actual metadata, which happened a bunch of years ago. And now we've got lots of local genres like Amapiano and things like that. It can be in the categorization at award shows. The Grammys have only had an African music category for the past 2 years, right? And even still, we're putting everything under the banner of African. And I'm sure the Latin American guys will feel the same, the difference between dembo and reggaeton. It's where do we start? And I think at the end of the day, we'd be wrong not to be having the conversation. I think it's extremely important to give local agency to all of these different cultures and sounds. But at the same time, I think it is a positive thing that we've broken out of the shackles of just being African music. You know, like an Ira Star song, for instance, or a Tyler song have been able to be put into this, well, they're just pop, or they're just R&B. Thames, you know, who won the Grammy this year, just R&B, you know? So I think it's a bit split. I think it can be negatively used as well. Like, I mean, there's all sorts of different contexts here, but I mean, we look at the context of Afro House, and right now that is largely the dominant sound in South Africa. And we know it's doing excellent things like internationally. And yet we have this situation where there are two sides of Afro House, right? We have the South African kind of originators of the sound who are doing quite well, playing all over Ibiza and the rest of the world and whatnot. And then we have some European artists who are also making Afro House. And this is not even passing any judgment about it currently. It's just that there is a nuance to navigate, right? And there is agency always to give back to the originators of this sound. And I think we always try to do that in terms of our translation of songs and the message that we're, you know, working with. But it's not an easy thing. And then just finally, there are artists who have no interest in going global, you know, and that's also like something that we've experienced recently with a couple of artists. And, you know, there are artists who are doing national sold out tours all over South Africa with zero, you know, worries about selling tickets every single year. Perhaps they're running a tour for an album that dropped 5 years ago, literally, you know, 6-7 years ago, and yet they're still selling it out. And it doesn't mean that because the sound is going global, that we all have to go global. You know, I think there's always just like a nuance between these situations, yeah.
Hey, insiders, we hope that you've been enjoying our featured conversation. Stay tuned because we've got so much value coming your way. But before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor. Hey there, insiders. Are you dreaming of making it big as a musician, artist, or industry pro? Well, at MUBUTV, we offer personalized coaching to help you turn that dream into reality.
Think of us as your personal guides, helping you polish your songs, craft your story, find your fans, and grow your social media like a pro.
No matter where you are in your journey, we've got the tools and strategies to take you higher. From live gigs to branding and marketing, our coaching is all about you.
Choose what fits your budget, from single sessions to value-packed bundles.
Start with a free 15-minute discovery call today at book.mubutv.com. Your music career is waiting. Remember why you started making music? That feeling of passion, hope, and longing, wanting someone to hear your story?
But chasing success can be confusing. Who do you reach out to? When? How do you avoid mistakes that could close doors?
At MUBUTV, we believe every artist deserves a clear path forward. That's why we've created 3 free guides that cover the essential skills every musician needs.
How to contact A&R executives with confidence. How to attract an artist manager who gets you. How to pitch your music for film and television placements.
These aren't just tips. They're blueprints designed for artists who want more than just dreams. They want results.
If you're listening right now on this podcast or watching on YouTube, look in the description below. Download these free guides that will change how you approach your music career forever.
Don't wait. Your future fans are waiting.
Hey, this is John Martin Keith from Edinburgh Music Productions and the podcast You Can Make a Living in the Music Industry. Are you an insider? I am. Subscribe now.
Yeah, I guess it's that definition of success that each artist has. So, it's a great segue to our next question. You know, Afro House is entering what you've described as its second phase. And I'm curious, what indicators do you use to determine when a genre is entering a new life cycle? And how does that inform Africori's strategic decisions?
Great question. There's many layers to that. I mean, I think first of all, I'll just start culturally. I mean, we've been around long enough, and I've been around long enough to have been there for the first phase of Afro House. It's not a new sound. I would say probably in like 2010, 2008 even is when the likes of Black Coffee and Da Capo and people like that started to come out and started to obviously do quite well internationally, Black Coffee especially. And so, of course, we had a bunch of artists that we worked with in the Afro House space, like, you know, perhaps even as late as 5 years ago. But to be honest with you, we found that it was struggling as a genre, you know, not just we, but the whole industry did, at least locally. So streams wise, it was really not performing, but these artists might still be booked and busy all over Europe, you know, and it was almost like this different community of creatives who would be making music that had certainly like local inspiration, but they would be ultimately just booked and busy everywhere except for home, you know, and they certainly wouldn't be streaming at home. So that was kind of the first phase. So then the last few years, and really especially the last, I'd say 2 years, has been the resurgence of this sound. I mean, it's never gone away. Certainly like the likes of Black Coffee and Oula the Song and people like that have been flying the flag throughout, but it has always had this potential to tap into an international market easier than some of the local sounds, some of the more localized sounds, let's say. And I think that's because of the format of the genre. You know, it is ultimately a form of, say, tech house, you know, or just tribal house. It was what it used to be called, or, you know, perhaps just deep house, you know. And so I think those spaces were extremely well formed, obviously, in the more broad global dance music market. And it has just started to kind of come back around. And I say started, like it's in an extremely good place. So you've seen the likes of kind of music, obviously, like Co-op the Sound. You know, there's many others. Zerb, there's so many to mention now, all typically working with international labels, but looking to tap back into the continent now. And I think that's a very positive thing about this second phase, is there is agency coming back to the continent. You might look at Zerb's record with Sophia and Zhao. I think it was last year or 2 years ago. It was a big smash hit. You know, Kenyan vocalist who at the time was somewhat unknown, but has now become the biggest East African artist, at least in terms of Spotify monthly listeners, because of that record. So there are certain things that have certainly been like kind of improved and enhanced in this second phase. I think we're looking at all sorts of different like data points. Of course, we're looking at streams. We're looking at how local charts are being affected. You know, we've noticed that Amapiano is still very dominant in South Africa, but it is not quite as dominant. And some of our biggest records locally have been Afro House records this year. So it's looking at the way that DJs like kind of music and events and festivals are co-opting the sound and local and international producers and DJs of the sound. And of course it's the social media side of things as well, you know. So I think it's all of that really. But I think the biggest shift for me has been in the streaming potential of that sound. Of course, that's like what we're primarily, you know, focused on. And, you know, there's just been a few breakout records. I can speak about an artist that I used to work with for many years. He's a good friend of mine. His name is Vanko. And he was with us for many years at Africori. And at that time, streaming-wise, locally, wasn't necessarily working so well. He went on to find a new situation and has now had a global hit, you know, called Yalla Habibi, which I'm sure you may have heard in the clubs anywhere in the world, you know. And what they did extremely well was they took the Afro House sound that Vanko has always been focused on. This is a South African producer. And they mixed in some Arabic with it, you know, understanding that a lot of the European and Western sort of dance music world has strong ties to Morocco and North Africa and Middle East, you know, and really tapping into that. And it exploded this year. So it's looking at all those sorts of situations and taking good note, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want to ask you to add to what you were just saying. As I was listening, I was realizing, you know, events like your IMS showcase, they seem to play a key role in bridging not only the geographic, but the industry gaps with a lot of artists. What do you see as the most impactful outcome of these showcases?
Yeah. I mean, look, firstly, I guess that's a prime example of the kind of work that we do that we feel differentiates us from just being a distro. You know, we were kind of running events and essentially taking artists with us internationally and trying to showcase the sound and the genres and putting them on the stage. And it began, that project, actually as a compilation series back in like 2022 or 2023, started by an ex-colleague of mine from Warner in the emerging markets. Her name is Selena Chowdhury. And she was just she was essentially like running an independent label within the Warner setup that was compiling music from emerging markets, right? And eventually she wanted to do one about Amapiano. We jumped on for that installment because, you know, we worked with a lot of those artists. And that then became a showcase in ADE, Amsterdam Dance Event, two years ago, I think. And, you know, it was the first step of what we were trying to do with essentially taking, at that point, Amapiano to the world. Dance music is king in South Africa. It's impossible to avoid it, especially in South Africa, but now I would say arguably across the continent. And for the longest time, the team, myself and the A&Rs and the marketing team, we have all been of the opinion that there are many, many spaces out there which were not being sort of introduced to the sound quickly enough. Of course, there were underground things happening. There was TikTok and all of that, but it was about how do we actually help our artists take this message by themselves to these, you know, more established, let's say, international spaces. So it always comes back to agency for us, I think. It's like having these artists represented. They consider us like, you know, quite trusted partners, and we do our best to make it happen. So in terms of like the most impact of that, I mean, I think it was a successful, you know, live stream that we did with Homecoming and was live streamed on Twitch. Had a pretty excellent, you know, audience at the time. I mean, we took maybe 4 or 5 artists, I think it was 4 artists to DJs to Ibiza. Some of them, it was their first time on the island. Definitely won't be their last. For me personally, I find that very rewarding because it's like, it's a first step in the career, you know, or it's at least one of the steps in the career. And if we can help them achieve that, they can go on to do so much by themselves. You know, I think a lot of the time, not in every case with the artists we took, but a lot of the time, they're not always having management, you know, necessarily. And so as a distro, this is what I mean by the kind of community center element of Africori. We have ended up filling the gap somehow as management or label, whatever it is, and kind of being more involved than perhaps just a delivery system would be, you know, who just gets you playlisting. So I think there's personal impact, you know, when that sort of personal impact happens to those artists and then they go back home and they influence their networks. And then there just becomes this kind of like more prominent trade route between, let's say, South Africa and Ibiza. I mean, it's all for the better of the culture, the commerce, you know, of the personalities, the opportunities involved. And I think that's one of the most impactful. But, you know, the event itself was great. We obviously had a panel as well as part of IMS where they spoke about whether Africa is a country or not, which it certainly is not. And I think it gave us all on that panel a chance to just discuss the fact that African dance music deserves to be considered as dance music. You know, it goes back to our talk about genres and classification. Like it's breaking down the boundaries that perhaps have been there historically. And I think that we are in a much, much better place with that now. You know, the conversations around African music and all of its genres are so prominent, you know.
You know, Adam, switching gears, you know, you were mentioning Warner Music, and I wanted to ask you, since Warner Music finalized its acquisition of Africori earlier this year, the growth has really been impressive, you know, from global hits like Jerusalema to Africori's rising influence across Africa. What would you say is the most important synergy between Africori's independent roots and Warner's global reach? And how do you maintain that balance as the company evolves?
Wow. Yeah, that is the question. It's an excellent question because it's something that we think about every day. I mean, we've been becoming part of the Warner system for probably the last 5 years, but now, of course, we're kind of firmly inside. To the extent that we just moved into the same offices together in Johannesburg, which is, you know, all sorts of newness, I guess, for the teams. And it's very interesting, especially for myself as someone who came from having, you know, contributed to building Africori for 12 years and, you know, we had nothing. We have a fiercely independent spirit. Our founder, Yoel, is that way. You know, I am that way, and most of the team are the same. And you know, it's sometimes it's growing pains, of course, but you know, at the end of the day, they have empowered us to be as independent as possible within the broader system of the corporate. And I think in emerging markets and in Africa, that makes all the difference. The reputations and the kind of footing of the major labels is not quite the same in Africa. And you'll find that across all of the majors. You know, most of the time, the distros that the majors have acquired are kind of a little bit more dug in. And yeah, you know, that is something that we are working on every single day, is how do we maintain our independence and also leverage the network. Many instances of us having incorporated what the Warner Network has to offer already. I mean, Jerusalem was the prime example. That was very, very kind of fortuitous. Just as we finished the deal, Jerusalem took off. And, you know, sorry, that was the initial deal. Just as we finished that initial deal, it completely exploded. We had the ability to discuss upstream and working it through Electra France, where it was really going, you know, crazy and has become multi-platinum since. And, you know, having all of those global teams and it being like a sort of global priority record for a major label is a pretty amazing thing to witness when you have that. In other instances, you know, like with Shwalabam, we have often sort of in that instance, we opted to kind of upstream within the ADA system. So now we're even working much more in hand with the sort of distribution network of Warner as well. And it just depends on the record as to what is right for it, you know, and what the artist wants and sometimes what spaces it's moving in. So yeah, there's certainly synergy, and it's very important for us to maintain our identity at the same time.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And it's interesting to hear your perspective throughout that. You know, I want to ask you about something on a deeper level regarding your work and the cultural aspect. You've said you have to be the one to take your culture to the world. What do you believe African artists today are teaching the world, not just musically, but philosophically or socially?
Wow, that's a big question. I mean, there's many things. Like, I think, yes, of course, musically, the power of dance, the power of, it's difficult to put into words what, for instance, Amapiano represents to people in this country. And there's a common phrase, Amapiano is a lifestyle. You know, it is the way people experience it. It is the drinking in the bars. It is the having a shisha. It's the loud music in a car wash or whatever it is. It's an entire culture. And I think what we've started to see, and also it's the phrases repeated by an MC over the top of the songs, you know, like in local vernacular language. And what we've seen, and it blew my mind a few years ago when I saw it, and I went back to London and I saw Amapiano like all over the place. And you would see London MCs and London DJs playing Amapiano music and spitting Amapiano Zulu lyrics to a bunch of Londoners, and they would all understand, or at least, you know, regurgitate the lyrics that they'd heard on a TikTok somewhere. You know, it's incredible to see a culture in its broader sense travel with a genre, you know? Obviously, I think Africa has many difficulties to navigate outside of music, but I think there is a strength and a compassion in the people here that is like second to none. You know, I keep thinking about, should I move back to London? And I've been here 8 years now, and the people keep me here, you know, at the end of the day. And for that to also be expressed, you know, by a promoter booking a DJ and feeling that warmth and feeling that energy, like, it's hard to put into words, you know? So I would say that that's the primary of it. Obviously, also what is happening in that process is the artists are becoming commercially successful. And for us as a company, it's so important to see more and more financially sustainable creatives coming from the continent. It's not always easy to ensure that it is sustainable. I mean, we have to do our due diligence to make sure it is for us, but obviously how that money is utilized and whether they've got the ability to kind of, you know, structure their lives and their careers and their business is a difficult thing. We've got a few plans in place to try and support that locally, actually. So yeah, it's you know, if you haven't come out here, you'll have to come out here and experience it to see it in its truest sense. But it's about kind of backing away from all of these images of God, Oxfam, starving children, and the crime-ridden spots of whether it's Johannesburg or Lagos. Once you understand the nuances of these places and the culture of these places, you'll see it's much deeper than that. And I think that's what music is doing to the rest of the world.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Adam, I want to ask you a personal question. Throughout your life, have there been any books, films, or documentaries that have really inspired you, professionally speaking, that you could recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, there are a couple that come to mind. I mean, I studied a lot about sort of South African cinema while I was in London at the time. And one of the films that really put me on the path that I am on now is called Tsotsi, which means thief, basically, in local street language in South Africa. And that went on to win the Oscar. That was a long time ago, but throughout that film, there is, of course, a very tough, gritty story expressed, but great soundtrack, and that set me off down a line of things to check out. And I was listening to soundtracks of soaps and kind of sitcoms from South Africa that were very, very culturally ingrained at that point. So Tsotsi is certainly one. I remember now Red Bull did a documentary a long time ago about electronic music in Mzansi. Mzansi is the sort of localized word for South Africa. It means the South, actually. And I'll have to try and dig out what it was called, but it was great. It was made by an artist called Spook Matambo, South African guy, but was living in Sweden. And it was just this exploration of what house music meant to people. It's extremely deep. Essentially, where the reason dance music is king in this country is because of the inspiration of house music from the US and Italo disco, and from the UK, even UK garage in places that was kind of coming over on vinyl. And around 1990, when apartheid was kind of ending, and when in 1994 it finally did, this new style of music emerged called Kwaito. And Kwaito was essentially slowed down house music where they would just take a vinyl and literally rip the beat, slow it down to 100 BPM, and then they would just rap in vernacular languages over the top. And that became the absolute sound of the post-apartheid youth. It was a very joyous, sort of celebratory, kind of apolitical music. They just needed some enjoyment after all of those years of, strife and tribulations. And Kwaito is absolutely the first iteration of what Amapiano is now. So in other words, street culture has kind of gone in full circle after these 20 years. So yeah, those would be the ones I would suggest.
Adam, let me ask you, what is the best way for people to reach you in Africori? Is it through the website or through socials?
Yeah, socials. Our website, there is a kind of general email which we can put out there, which is music@africori.com. We are at a place where we are not taking lots of artists these days, actually. We're trying to be a little more boutique. But, be more than happy to hear if any of your listeners would want to get in touch. Feel free.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much. We cannot thank you enough for taking the time
Adam.
to do this. This has been so insightful, so informative, and we are very, very grateful to you for your time and for your sharing of all of your experience. This has been something that, we have really wanted to do for a very, very long time, and I'm very, very grateful to you. We both are.
Thank you.
No, you're more than welcome. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I hope it helps explain some of what's happening, and make sure you guys get out here to Joburg or wherever, come and see us soon.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you again. Man, Eric, I hope this is not our last conversation with Adam. This is a territory and a continent that is really on the precipice of delivering and having huge impact in music.
Definitely.
And I thought Adam made such incredible points. I love the way he talked about the strategies for international success today. I think his quote that I wrote down was, you can't release a song anymore without thinking about international. Whether it's remixes, working with Latin artists, Japanese rappers, and so forth, which is so true. In other words,
it's part of that global plan.
Absolutely. Thinking global. And he talked about, Shawalabam being an international success, having success outside of the territory,
Right.
in Nigeria. I mean, all of that, those things are so important in spreading music today. And that's been happening very, very slowly, if you've been paying attention, over the last several years, perhaps in other countries, which is why, the emergence of, if we look at maybe the last 10 years with South Korea, if we look at, Africa, if we look at the MENA territories of Middle
Right.
East, North Africa, or Latin America, and the expansion of Latin music,
The
all
Philippines, all those
around
territories.
Southeast Asia,
Right.
absolutely. So this was a real indicator of a global consciousness and a market shift awareness that's happening everywhere.
One of the other areas, again, in this great conversation was on Africori support for artists entering international markets, kind of, tagging on to what you were saying. And, I love what he said, we hold hands, I suppose, and we try to help these artists sort of step into international spaces, whether it's knowing which promoters to deal with, identifying the right media to work with in the US, or understanding which events to do. It's always been a mission for us. Again, it's that whole idea of that real artist development and trying to get artists from point A to point B in a way that's been kind of lost recently. And I think they're doing an amazing job of that.
I think so too. I couldn't agree with you more. And they're doing it on an international level,
Right.
Not just in Africa, but in other territories as well. That's part of that consciousness that I
Correct.
thought was so interesting about when he spoke about that. You don't just think of local markets anymore. You think of a whole international base. And, it's kind of like that phrase that we used to hear, the world is such a small place.
Right.
And now it's all reachable.
Right.
It's all reachable, whether it's in the Middle East or in Africa or in Japan or in Latin America, it doesn't matter. It's all available. The whole world is available to artists today.
Hey, Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at mubutv.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top-rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes and our space. You can also find us at social media at Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter X, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Music Business Insider video series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Ritch Ezra and Eric Knight. Theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast.